I just want to make an appeal that when you start talking about repentance and identifying what you're repenting of, that you're very clear in what you did, and you don't rationalize it or justify it in any way. Let me give you an illustration. I want to take one of the most common sins that all of us commit, and that is anger. And I want to give you a sin category for anger. In James 4, he called it murder. For those of you who are familiar with James 4, you know what he did there. He took the word anger and he called it murder. That is the clearest possible way of describing this sin. And the thing that I like about what James did is that, well, it puts it in the stratosphere as far as clarity is concerned. There's nothing else that you could say that can intensify anger more than calling it murder. And so what I've done, and what you're looking at on the screen, is that I built out what I call the anger spectrum. And so I've taken anger and I've pushed it, I've called it murder, and then I've stretched it to its extremities. And so on one side of anger or murder, we have the worst case of murder, obviously physical death. But if you turn and go in the other direction as far as you can possibly go, you have the most mild form of murder or anger, and that is called the silent treatment. You see, physical death and silent treatment say the same thing. Now, consequentially, they are a zillion miles apart. I mean, consequentially. But I'm not talking about consequences. I'm talking about one sin, and it doesn't matter what you call it. Any one of these labels would put Christ on the cross, whether it's silent treatment or physical murder. And so I've taken anger, or what James calls murder, and I pushed them out as far as they can go. And on one end, you have physical death. Physical death says, I don't like you anymore, therefore I'm going to physically get rid of you. Silent treatment on the opposite end, it says the same thing. I don't like you anymore, therefore I'm going to pretend you do not exist. And those are the farthest extremities of one sin, anger. Now, what I've done in this anger spectrum is I divided the slide in half. And on the left side of the screen, moving toward physical murder, I have some of the harshest forms of anger that you will ever exhibit or ever experience. Sexual abuse, physical abuse, racism, verbal abuse, throwing things, road rage, yelling, lecturing, cursing, flipping off, and so forth. Most of us do not commit. I trust we don't commit any of those things. Most of us do not commit any of those things, and that is good. But the point that I want to make is that we can dumb down our murder to such a point that we can make it acceptable. And so on the right side of the screen, moving towards silent treatment now, I have some of the less consequentially harsh forms of anger, like gossip, dismissiveness, stubbornness, bitterness, defensiveness, criticalness, cynicism, impatience, eye-rolling, apathy, huffing under the breath, negativity. And here's my point. Point number one in the doctrine of repentance is sin, and the big idea is that we want to be very clear in our categories. We don't want to fall in the trap of comparing our anger to somebody else's or watering our anger down to such a degree that we don't even sense that we're doing anything wrong anymore. James just called it one thing. He called it murder.